That's some introduction. It's a little hard to follow that one. It's not an introduction, that's a convocation talk right in and of itself. I'm humbled and honored to be here. It's hard to believe January's over. It seems like Christmas holidays were just 3 months ago or something. Time has gone so very fast. Hopefully you're feeling settled into the new semester. Over the holidays, I watched a classic. I watched The Hobbit in 3D with my kids. Anybody else? Hobbit fans? Anybody see the movie? Okay, so this is the second installment. My kids and I had to go back, and we needed to watch The Hobbit again in 2D just to see if we missed anything. And I'm convinced there's no way to tell that story that I am not just going to love. It's just such a great story, thanks to Tolkien's artistry. For those of you that don't know, The Hobbit is a prequel of the Lord of the Rings series. When my family and I lived in Scotland, I would read this book aloud by the side of the river. I'd read it to my kids, and they'd skip rocks and listen. Sometimes when we were feeling like we needed to get a lot of work done through The Hobbit, we'd pack a lunch and some snacks, and we'd stay out by the river for 5 or 6 hours at a stretch. There's not too many books that can keep an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old enraptured that long. Great memories. But believe it or not, I think this classic story might have a point that's important for us to hear today here at Gordon. Some of you might not even know what a hobbit is yet, so let me help you. Allow me to suggest that you may be a hobbit if some of the following describes you. You're most cozy in a tidy subterranean home. You eat as many meals a day at Lane as you can. An ideal day would have more than 5. You have an uncanny knack for sneaking up on people. You're a bit hairier and maybe softer than some of your other friends. And you possess a curious aversion to adventures. There's a quote from our hero, Bilbo Baggins, that goes something like this: "We're a plain, quiet folk. We have no use for adventures. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things that make you late for dinner. And for a hobbit, that is a tragedy." The Shire is their home. This is a magically beautiful place. It's remarkable, really. The Shire is known for its rolling hills, its quaint round doors, colorful pathways, and gardens. Now I'd like to put a question to you. Is Gordon a bit Shire-like? So I'm going to ask the question again, and if you think Gordon is a little bit like the Shire, I want you to raise your hand and nod like this. So I know. Do you think Gordon is a little bit like the Shire in some ways? Okay. I love our theme from Philippians that Tom has picked for this semester. Some of Paul's language in Philippians has grown a little bit familiar to me, and so I wondered if I'd gain any new insights if Tolkien were to rewrite Paul's letter. Something like a letter from Bilbo to those of us here at Gordon. So pardon the following feeble attempt. I'll be translating from the original Elvish. I used to be a perfectly respectable hobbit, a model hobbit, in fact. I hailed from the respectable Baggins line, rarely consorted with Brandybooks, Broadfeet, or other families of lesser repute. I was voted to serve as the local authority, to handle disputes, and it was I that reinstituted the law allowing 3rd and 4th desserts, a law many of us have come to appreciate. My gardens flourished, and they bloomed. My cupboards were always full. My door always welcome to welcome guests. I steered well clear of anything unexpected or external to the matters of the Shire, and, I might add, I felt no desire to explore beyond our borders. But I hosted one visitor too many in my hobbit hole. He looked like a fairly common hobbit at first, but it wasn't until after our second cup of tea that I discovered he was the one and only son of our Creator. I've never been the same since that visit. Now here is someone who lived in the house of the Creator himself. And he denied all power and status that he could reasonably claim or deserve, and he became a short, furry-footed hobbit like us. Worse, he entered the Shire without family status or even a hole of his own. Worse still, he told me he was under the Creator's orders to take a journey he was certain would end in death. I believed his story with my whole heart. In fact, I've long since concluded he is the hero that was foretold. He will be the person people sing songs about someday. He had his own orders to carry out from the Creator, but he asked me to find his trail and to follow behind. Against my better judgment and my neighbor's warnings, I left the Shire a few years ago to follow in his footsteps. I can tell you now, I have no regret for the respectable life that I left behind. My reputation, my best silverware, everything is completely worthless compared to the treasure I'm after now. This is a cause I would willingly die for. The eternal hope and glory he has promised me is worth more than all of this that I used to prize before. I've certainly not reached the end of this adventure, but I know that if I want to follow in his footsteps, I too must suffer and sacrifice. I know now that when the journey ends, I'll be made a perfect member of a new village on the Creator's land that makes the Shire look like a wasteland. I've been traveling this hidden path that he challenged me to find. And along the way, I have faced hardship. I've risked my life and nearly died on a number of occasions. I've been captured and derailed more than once. I've faced dodgy scoundrels interested in nothing but what they could take from others and claim for themselves. I'm sure the Creator's Son must have faced worse difficulties than this even. I've also learned some valuable lessons on the way. I've concluded that every new day is worth my best effort. I won't be bogged down with the things from my past or too lazy to take the next steps and press on. Every day, I have had enough for what that journey required, just as he said I would. I no longer panic if I don't have food or money, and I don't get attached to them when I do. I've noticed that every time I get over a difficult obstacle, it gives courage to the others that are on a similar journey. I can't stop now, or they'd be overcome with fear and turn back. I celebrate each day's progress. And for those of you just setting out, I'd like you to take this song with you and heed this advice for the journey. Venture ever on and on. Strive from early break of dawn. Always holding true the road. Do not stop, despite the load. Walk as the Creator's Son. Famine or feast, warm fires and beasts, comfort and toil, plans that are foiled. See where he beckons you now. Short though you may be, his height is for thee. His stature extends when endurance ends. Your lack and your luck he will fill. Expect each surprise. Share your supplies. Do not complain. Sing. Let your fellowship ring. His hope everlasting awaits. Venture ever on and on. Together as one we sing. That last bit actually sounds better when it's accompanied with a mandolin, but I don't know. So I hope such an account can illustrate some of my favorite themes in Paul's letter to the Philippians from what I just read. First, Paul's status. His prior status and his prestige among his former peers, he counted worthless in the end. Christ's prior status as one with our Creator, and the fulfillment that came to both of these people, these heroes, Christ himself, when they were willing to sacrifice their own ambitions to pursue God's ambition for them. You can see why I get inspired by this particular scripture. Now, Gordon was recently commended as being perhaps the safest college in the nation. We now have our own police department, even. We've got panic buttons strategically located throughout the campus, and so if we ever needed them, we could hit them. We have more reason than ever to sleep better at night than we did before. But is it possible to have too much safety? Can safety ever be a bad thing? If Gordon has Shire-like qualities, and it's rated one of the safest countries in the nation, then what could we possibly have to worry about? Much of what I feel like I've learned on this topic, I've learned from my own story in a place called Westmontshire. So I thought I was going to attend the University of California in Los Angeles. My father and I were driving there to see the campus when we needed to stop for gas near Santa Barbara. We looked at our little map, and it said there was a tiny college up there to go see, so we thought, let's go check it out. I thought I had died and gone to heaven when I arrived at Westmont for the first time. I didn't know such comforts could exist in one place. Everyone seemed to look, believe, and think a little bit like I did. I applied, I was accepted. I might be the only person who was accepted into Westmont that sent a dozen roses to the admissions counselor that sent me the letter. That's how excited I was. And I never visited a single other campus after visiting Westmontshire. By my senior year, however, I was starting to see some of the dark side of being in such a comfortable place. No community is an island, nor can it remain so for long. Christians are called to engagement, to be in, albeit not of, the broader world. And it dawned on me that this wasn't meant to be a lifelong home, after all. Places like Westmont are to be seen as a type of training ground for those that are about to be sent out. By the time I graduated, I was dying to embark on my first adventure outside of Westmontshire. About 6 years after I graduated, somebody pulled me aside and they said, you're a little bit odd. You're kind of wired like an entrepreneur, an explorer who's always seeking to find his own path. And then when I finally paused to think about it, I thought, you know what? You're right. Even when I think back to my childhood, I've been a little bit odd in this way. Here's one example. When I was about 10 years old, I decided it would be amazing if I could see a hummingbird up close. And so, maybe you didn't do this when you were 10. I'm not sure. But I thought, they're so gorgeous far away. If I could get up close, then it's going to be pretty dramatic. They shimmer in the light. It's just amazing. So I thought, what if I just stood underneath the hummingbird feeder? This is a picture of me up on the left. This is a picture of me waiting for a hummingbird to land on my arm. So this is before the days when normal people could afford really high-powered binoculars, and it seemed like the only way this was going to happen is if I went out there and found some way. So I stood out there, and I tried to wait underneath the hummingbird feeder until the hummingbird would land on my arm. My parents, my siblings were sitting inside laughing at me. That's about the time they took this picture. The first problem I realized was I couldn't hold my arm up very long. And so after 10 minutes, I had to go to the shed, find a stick, cut it to fit. So this is me with my stick. About 45 minutes went by, and then this amazing, amazing thing started to happen. I heard a sound behind me. I didn't want to turn around. I'm frozen. And the sound was like tiny, tiny little wings. We're getting closer. So I thought, this might work. About 20 minutes later, I think it was the same bird, came and was getting close to my arm, wondering, what is this guy and why is he in the way of my bird feeder? And then about 15 minutes after that, he landed on my arm. I couldn't even feel it. They weigh nothing. But here I am, you can see, just inches away from this bird that has this gorgeous, gorgeous ruby-breasted armor, in a way. It's just amazing. Over time, the birds started landing on my arm regularly. So whenever I'd go to visit my grandparents, I would be found out there with my stick, waiting for the next birds to come. And I never got tired of seeing these birds. I know, I was an odd child. But I've seen a lot of beautiful things that others didn't get to because of that. So my own journey after Westmontshire, it took me into many perilous domains. I was nearly enslaved by giants. I nearly fell under the spell of those selling addictive potions. And this is a true story. I traveled with a pack of thieves every day for 2 years. After a decade in business, I decided to do something again that people told me was impossible, to pursue a PhD so that I could teach at my alma mater as a professor. Now, if you're a guy and you get your PhD in a place like Scotland, This is the way you dress at the final ceremony. And lo and behold, Westmontshire hired me to come back when I finished that, getting my degree. On paper, it seemed like a complete dream come true. Student body president, loves his college so much, he gets a PhD and comes back as a professor. My favorite professor when I was a student had become provost. Stan Gady, who you heard speak on Monday, was president at the time. My roommate returned at the same time as a biology professor. It just seemed like a picture book fairy tale that was completed. My wife and I had somehow found a way to live in Santa Barbara, this amazing place in California, but something was clearly wrong. Maybe a few things. First, I feel I may have succumbed a little bit to what I'll call the Shire effect. This is a capacity to place unrealistic hopes on the peace and comfort represented by somewhere in your past. You may recall the Israelites fell prey to the same Shire effect when they left Egypt. And at one point, they were crying out to Moses that they'd rather return to captivity in Egypt than continue and starve, perhaps in the desert. Second problem, if I'm honest, it was an uneasy fit for me at Westmont. Somewhere over the prior decade, I'd grown to love representing my faith in a secular work environment. And my wife and I loved living intentionally in Seattle's inner city with the Jukanoviches. What was I doing living in faculty housing on a Christian campus in Santa Barbara, the same hometown that Oprah, Stallone, and California's Rich and Famous call home? Third problem I noticed. Though I told my story and encouraged students to embark on greater adventures than I had ever been on, I knew that I was better at showing them than telling them. And I also began to grow as if, I began to feel as if I was hiding in a way. I was becoming so comfortable at Westmontshire that I was hiding from what God wanted me to do. With each passing year, I felt my world shrinking and the growing need to leave. Now, something similar happened to Bilbo after his first adventure. He returned to the Shire after many months of longing and idealizing the place and longing for the peace and quiet back home. He found that it was anything but that when he finally got there. The neighbors presumed he was dead, and they were auctioning off all of his stuff when he got back. After his adventures, he was thereafter deemed no longer quite respectable anymore. Parents would steer their children away from him as if he was some odd stranger. Bilbo took to writing and talking of his adventures, and he relished more and more the occasional visit from his traveling companions from the outside world. He acknowledged that he did not quite fit as well as he used to, but nor did he want to fit as he had. I took some comfort in the words of a song by Sarah Groves. The places that used to fit me cannot hold the things I've learned. I wasn't the person I'd been before, to God's credit, so Westmontshire couldn't feel as comfortable as it had to me before. So in my fourth year as professor, I made the difficult and painful choice to resign. In a way, I feel like I graduated from Westmontshire twice, once as a student and then again as a professor. And just about the time I was at my lowest, most depressed point, about 5 years ago, God somehow captured me with what may well be the boldest, most impossible mission of my entire life. And the call developed over a weekend retreat with the Jukanoviches and the Crocketts and a napkin where we started sketching things, and we called this retreat the Dream Summit. We wanted God to speak to us because we needed to know what he wanted us to do next. The Jukanoviches were in a place of transition. They just visited East Africa. Dano was stepping down as CEO of a construction company. Both he and I felt like we'd received some of the best management training from some of the best and biggest companies in the world. But we didn't want to use our training the way those companies wanted us to use it. We wanted to serve some higher purpose if possible. We wanted to see if it was possible to take the same skills and apply them in a way and in a place where they would make a bigger impact. And we wondered if you could do that in a poor developing country. I shared this idea with one of my closest friends from Westmont, and he said this sounded a whole lot more fulfilling than remaining on as an executive in the upper echelons of Microsoft, and so he left to join us. In the end, 3 families moved to Rwanda to start a social venture that most said could never succeed. As Jennifer already mentioned, we sold our houses, we sold our cars, we bought 13 one-way tickets to move our families and embark on a venture nobody had attempted in this little country of Rwanda. The creation of a world-class management consultancy to build up companies in the struggling economy of one of the poorest countries in sub-Saharan Africa. That was our dream. We called it Kerasimbi Business Partners. Kerasimbi is the name of the highest mountain in Rwanda. Our attire and our commute were quite different than we'd become used to in corporate America. This is how we went around for 4 years in Rwanda. I don't want you to think it was all fun and games. The very night that we moved into our house, the electricity and the water were both out. When I finally found a flashlight and turned it on, there were cockroaches crawling everywhere. My teenagers, who are normally pretty bold, cried, "We want to go home." So, what do? We huddled together on one bed underneath the mosquito net with a laptop and tried to watch a movie to calm down a little bit. The movie I chose, I thought you can't go wrong with a happy animated classic. I chose WALL-E at the time. You see the problem. I hadn't pre-screened the movie. I didn't know that one of the main characters was a cockroach. People would stare at us almost every single day of our lives in Rwanda. In our first year alone, our SUV had 14 flat tires. 14. The roads were so bad. It seemed like you couldn't reliably get anywhere on time. Our kids went to a very basic and strict missionary school, but because we didn't have churches supporting us, we didn't get the discounted missionary rate. It took us quite a while to earn the trust of the Rwandans that we wanted to work with, and it took us even longer to build that trust by doing quality work. I've got to say, I went to bed every night more tired and exhausted than with any other job I'd ever had. But every day, every morning, I woke up more convinced that God was moving through us and that we should keep up the fight. After receiving help from donors and depleting our own savings for the first 2 years, our company became profitable and since has become established as one of the only consulting firms of its type. It's sustainable, and it's become a new model for economic development in emerging post-conflict settings like Rwanda. We were deeply impacted by dear Rwandan friends, from those that I played soccer with in front of my house to those that I worked with every day. We fell in love with this small but hopeful country. It satisfied my calling to serve the poor, and it became a more fulfilling job than any I could have ever named or created myself. We never hid the fact that God called us, and if he hadn't called us, we never would have even attempted this. Our company grew. This is the company recently. It's now added a couple more. Our families grew too. You can see in this picture that the Jukanovic family and two other families adopted Rwandan boys while we lived there. God's favor was on this like nothing I've ever had a part in before. So what's the one thing better than feeling God's pleasure in the pursuit of his calling? Feeling God's pleasure in the pursuit of a calling with your dearest friends. It's quite the thrill of a lifetime. The depth of fellowship that we shared together, these three families, and then gradually more and more, it was amazing. We shared a common faith, common values, a big noble mission. We shared meals, clothes, electricity and water when it went out at the other people's houses, carpooling, cars, holidays, language lessons, motorcycle treks, dance parties, a church that we started, medicine for strange intestinal illnesses you do not want me to tell you any more about today. Not only would the mission have failed if we hadn't had the three families and the support network that provided, It was the thrill of a lifetime to do it together. And it was the closest I've ever come to the ideal that Paul describes in his letter to the Philippians. To love one another, to work together with one mind and with one purpose. This is also one of the reasons we chose to come back to the U.S. when the other families did, and why we feel so fortunate to be connected to Gordon and to be down the street again from the Djukanovich family. Never before have I been so convinced that my own plans are a pitiful substitute for God's master plan. And never before have I been so convinced that the God who does call you will be sufficient to give you what you need to fulfill that call. So I'd like to return to my prior question. Can safety be a dangerous thing? This is a picture of a real church called Safe Harbor Church. I cringe when I drive by churches with signs like this. Maybe it's just me. I don't know what it is. It looks to me like this is a place where Christians come to die. Safe harbor. It's a shielded harbor where folks could drop anchor and talk amongst themselves, is what it feels like, just in name. There's an old 19th century quote, "A ship in the harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are made for." What were you built for? There should be no doubt of one thing. Each of us was made for more than shallow waters. Now, Gordon is a very special place with a mission that's uniquely appropriate for the current times and culture, and a strong tradition for sending Christians out. It goes all the way back to our entrepreneurial founder, A.J. Gordon. He was very clear about the primary purpose of this institution, that it was to be a place for equipping and sending out faithful people. But we must acknowledge the danger of being in a safe place, to being in a place a little bit like Gordonshire. It can be easy to think big thoughts and develop deep convictions without translating them into action. I've spoken to people outside our community here in North Shore and Boston, and some don't see how our kind are relevant anymore. They're apt to accuse us of staying to ourselves, ignoring the needs of the rest of our planet, seeking our own desires to be fat and happy, and frankly, smoking a bit too much of our own pipeweed. To be sure, there's a place for comfort. For one thing, simply to prepare you for the mission ahead. My wife, Carrie, likes to say, you need to be settled in order to be scattered. And getting settled here at Gordon may be an important part of your preparation. We can illustrate this in a way. If you picture a launch pad, if it's shaky and unsteady, then it gives you less confidence to actually go as far or as well as you'd like when you take the leap. One of the things I want you to take away from this talk is the notion that safety can be overrated. I dream of a day when Gordon's not known for the safety that students have while they're here, but for the risks that they take when they leave here. In this way, this is also kind of my job. And in my role as the founding director of this new center, I'm looking to inspire and equip students to venture out. And I'm thrilled that Gordon's the first school of its kind to even have such an initiative as a Center for Entrepreneurial Leadership. I hope to make it easier to identify and celebrate the pioneers among you. I was told that this might be difficult, but now that we've had 100 people sign up for the Social Venture Challenge, I'm starting to think, no, it's actually in the ethos here at Gordon already. Some of you might be the types of pioneers that we're looking for. Some of the telltale signs, there's a few among you that are Pike Scholars. And anybody that creates their own major and then has the determination to push through all the paperwork to get it done, that's the kind of explorer that we need more of. Or maybe you've traveled abroad, or you've gained some perspective through some circumstance or place that you've visited before that allows you to see the things that others don't. These are enabled through trips like the Global Education, mission trips, Gordon and Lynn. Or maybe you simply just have a preference for carving your own path. So the other day, I was walking with Chan Mi, who was kind enough to do the prayer this morning. And this is the snow over by the quad, which is all covered right now. And you can see the path that most people take. But what I saw Chan Mi doing was a little bit different. What Chan Mi likes to do is to find her own path, to boldly attack the snow and make her own trail. And that's actually the way some of us are wired. That's the way I think as well. Here, can we do the next slide so you can see Chan Mi's path? There it is. There it is. Bold progress is rarely instigated by those who play it safe. Those unafraid to fail are those who learn the most, and often the fastest. One thing I like about the story about Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, these types of folks that have created large organizations, is that they established an alternative to the standard options that we would otherwise seek in the career services office. In a way, they followed their passion and became job creators instead of job seekers. And you could as well. The world needs more global change agents like you. One of the most appealing things about starting your own venture is the power that it offers to build the change you want to see. In the life of any venture, the best time to instill and shape the values and vision is at the very beginning. In closing, there's 3 things I'd like to encourage all of you to do. Seek your noble mission. Don't be content in the harbor. And don't be too swayed by the path that seems safe, logical, or what others would want for your life. In my experience, your mission could come as a soft, still voice, or it could be a direct order that's too loud to ignore. But each of us has a God-shaped mission to attend to. And when you hear it, second point, obey immediately. Once you know the orders come from God, there's only one thing for you to do, and that's obey. In my experience, God often requires that we take the first step. He waits for us to obey before he reveals the next step in his master plan. I wish it weren't that way, but it just seems to be that way, at least in my life. If we return to the ship metaphor, then I believe God finds it preferable to steer those ships that have already lifted the anchor and set forth. But it isn't clear where this will lead, some of you remark. In my experience, it never is. There's a picture there. This often feels like the kind of fog that I try to wade through myself. I think God prefers to reveal himself on a need-to-know, not a when-I-want-to-know basis. And he usually waits for me to take the first step, to do what's in front of me today before he shows me what he wants for me tomorrow. For some of you, the sooner you start on this path, the better. It won't get any clearer until you get moving. And what if I don't have what it takes, some of you might ask? Well, you're in luck, because God seems to have a preference for using inadequate people to accomplish impossible missions. Look at the story of Ketasimbi Business Partners. Look at the story of Paul. Explorers of old and change agents of today are known for pursuing opportunities regardless the resources that they possess. Christian ventures should be marked by a faith and eternal hope that makes them even more daring than that. He receives the glory when we step out in faith and God-sized dreams. Gordon has some amazing risk-taking alum. Jennifer Jukanovic is the one that I know best, but there's quite a list of great alum that haven't been afraid to take risks, and you could be the next. Obedience is a contact sport, so thinking and talking about the journey is not going to be enough. You need to throw yourself into it. And thirdly, stay the course. Like Paul, even like Bilbo, know that the hardships pave the way for progress. You'll strain, you'll fall down, and he'll sustain and pick you up. Gordonshire may seem great, but it's merely your launching pad to something greater. One more thing. Once you make a commitment move, I think you'll find that others will have the courage to do so as well. You might have seen this in Levita, when the person ahead of you did the amazing commitment move that they needed to manage the ropes course. It made it easier for everybody else in line to do the same. Venturing out is contagious. Paul got this and wrote about it a little bit in his letter to the Philippians. Gordon is a very special place, and I'm fairly certain that there's no better place for venturing out from than this. But don't confuse Gordon for the venture. The venture's out there. Each of you were made for heeding a deeper call. This entire community, in a way, is designed to facilitate that. The admissions people invited you and got you into this community. The professors and staff, the chapels and courses, they all help you to settle, find, and stretch yourself, to confront the world's challenges and figure out what you're going to do about them. And I feel like I've got one of the greatest privileges of all. I get to encourage you to take that first step. So I'll say it again. I dream of a day when Gordon is known not just for the safety students have while they're here, but for the risks that they take when they leave here. Gordonshire is an ideal place to find friends for the journey. May you be blessed as we have been to journey with dear friends. And now, if you'll pardon me for a little closing poetry. Venture on and on, together as one we sing. Short though you be, his height is for thee. His stature extends when endurance ends. Your lack and your luck he has filled. Expect each surprise. Share your supplies. Don't complain, sing. Let your fellowship ring. His hope awaits. You're dismissed with this charge. Follow your path further up and further in for his glory. Thank you.